If you're unfamiliar with the channel or these videos, this is part of a longer series where I cover the entire history of Weekly Shonen Jump, manga by manga. Last time we covered 1984 and Dragon Ball, where I went over its first arc, and we'll look into Dragon Ball's next arc today, as well as a whole host of other manga from the year 1985. So go watch the 1984 video if you want to start at Dragon Ball's beginning, or go back to the very beginning in 1968 if you'd like to see everything from Jump's inception. If not, then let's get ready to dive in headfirst into Shonen Jump's golden age in the year 1985. Our first manga of 1985 is Mr. Lion, lasting 10 chapters compiled into one volume by Shinobu Onishi. The plot follows Shishido Daisuke, a police officer who was fired for being too violent with local delinquents. He then changes his job to be a substitute teacher in an all-girls school, a setup which might lead you to think it was a gag or ecchi manga, but it was actually a very tame and earnest manga focusing on Daisuke helping the girls with their problems without it being too over-the-top or fight-centric. It's an interesting manga for Jump which was pretty heavily action-focused at the time. Written by a female author and focusing on having a lot more female characters made it stand out a lot. The softer art also helped it distinguish itself from everything else, but it likely wasn't a very good fit for the magazine, leading to its quick cancellation. Next up we have one of the pillars of Jump's golden age, Tsukasa Hojo's City Hunter, running for a total of 336 chapters and 35 volumes. City Hunter follows Ryo Saiba, a sweeper, a kind of bounty hunter-esque character who deals with the unsavory underworld types of Tokyo and works for a fee. He's cool-headed, an excellent marksman, and loves ladies a little bit too much, which leads to some funny gags as well as some nicer romantic moments where the series gets to show off its more mature side. At the beginning, Ryo's partner Hideyuki is murdered, leading him to team up with his sister Kaori, who becomes a great foil to Ryo, bashing him with a massive hammer if he's being too perverted. They also gradually develop feelings for each other, and their romance permeates the series as they take on different jobs together. Just like Cat's Eye, Tsukasa Hojo has a flair for more mature stories, which stand out in Jump with their adult cast, often tackling loftier themes. Maybe it's akin to seeing an older brother or father figure act that attracted so many people to City Hunter. It could have also been appealing to older readers as well as women who might have vibed with some of the more romantic elements and Tsukasa Hojo's softer and more refined art style, which has only improved since Cat's Eye. From realistic guns and action scenes to beautiful dramatic ones that depict a lot of depth in the character's facial emotion, City Hunter is masterfully drawn and a joy to look at. I can't comment much on its overarching story or ending, but from what I've read, I've had a very good time and will gradually read it over time when I can. I kinda wanna savor this one. This is a work that's had fan translations for a long time. It has been published in English as well, similarly to Fist of the North Star, under Gutsoon Entertainment's Raijin Comics imprint, but those issues have long since been out of print. In recent years, an official one has popped up through a service called Manga Hot. The app and website appears to be in Japanese, so you'll need to translate it, but they have a professional English translation that does go up to chapter 87 at the time of writing. I can't get the app in the UK, but I can access the website version, which is how I've read some of City Hunter. You can access a few chapters for free before points and adverts get involved. It's not a perfect system, but it is kind of workable if you'd like to read City Hunter officially. I'll try to leave a link to it down below. City Hunter wouldn't just be successful in its original manga form, having some spin-off works and its characters appearing in other major works of Tsukasa Hojo's, like Angel Heart, which is in a sort of parallel City Hunter universe from my understanding. There's also the currently ongoing Kyokara City Hunter, which is a City Hunter isekai, following an older woman in her 40s who gets reincarnated into the world of City Hunter. It also had multiple seasons of anime stretching from 1987 to 1991, animated movies, one of which has a crossover with Hojo's past work Cat's Eye, and one later in 2023, City Hunter the movie Angel Dust. City Hunter has also been the subject of numerous live-action film adaptations, some a bit looser than others, with one of the more famous ones being the 1993 Hong Kong version featuring Jackie Chan as Ryo, which was my first exposure to the series and it's a lot of fun. It even gave us the best Street Fighter crossover ever made.
Who's next? Huh?
There's also been the recent 2018 French film, as well as various TV series adaptations from China and Korea. City Hunter also received a brand new Japanese live-action film in April of 2024, which I've also seen and it's excellent. It really captures the vibes of the manga and it looks great. City Hunter has a pretty large legacy under its belt, with it having fans all over the world, in particular other Asian countries and parts of Europe, and I think it's very cool that it still receives a lot of love even today, despite its age. Following City Hunter, we would get another pretty big hidden jump from Koichi Endo, Tsuide ni Tonchinkan, lasting 212 chapters and 18 volumes. This manga follows a group of high schoolers and their teacher Nukesaku, who all act as one part of the Phantom Thief Tonchinkan group. Together they steal useless objects, with the manga largely acting as a parody of the Phantom Thief subgenre. It was fitting it debuted when it did, as Koichi Endo proposed the series after the ending of Cat's Eye, one of Jump's flagship manga of the early 80s, which involved a group of phantom thieves. The manga would gradually shift in tone though to focus more on wacky school hijinks and slice of life elements as it went on, diversifying itself and its gags, which was likely the right call as it had a pretty good run. Its style of jokes mostly consisted of some vulgar ones like the male characters exposing their ass or crotch. References to pop culture also appeared, and other manga like JoJo, these were all pretty common, as well as a handful of ones that wouldn't fly today, which include the usual racism of the era and jokes making fun of the AIDS epidemic. It's pretty typical for older manga to stumble in some regard when you compare them to what's acceptable now, but future editions of the manga would remove or avoid some of the more problematic chapters or elements. It also got a sequel called Miracle Tonchinkan in Monthly Jump, running for 4 volumes, as well as a 43-episode TV show. And with Sakigake Otokojuku, we have 3 jump hits back to back. This one lasting 314 chapters and 34 volumes by Akira Miyashita. Like Miyashita's previous works, its primary focus, at least initially, is to showcase young adults being hypermasculine. Whether this is satirical or not is up to your interpretation. This time we're back to school, like in Miyashita's first work, Perfect Path High School. Otokojuku is a bit more structured, with its students being trained in areas beside just combat, with economics and politics being partially focused on. That doesn't really matter though, as it starts out as a gag manga before gradually shifting to become a lot more battle focused than past Miyashita manga, likely due to the popularity of other manga like Fist of the North Star at the time. The manga would go through multiple large arcs throughout its run, with the main characters often brushing up against other schools or groups, battling them with various martial arts or in sports-like competitions, with them befriending new characters along the way like your usual traditional shonen battle manga. I've got to confess, I didn't actually read all of Sakigake Otokojuku. I've read plenty of Akira Miyashita manga up until this point, and it felt kind of samey after 3 volumes. If his other manga appeals to you, or if you want to read a long old school shonen battle manga, I think you might enjoy this though. Sakigake Otokojuku has had, from my knowledge, 2 entire fan translation efforts, as well as an official one which is available on Manga Planet, the same service I mentioned when I talked about Ginga in the 1983 video. Sakigake would also receive various sequels and spin-offs by Akira Miyashita and other authors, as well as a 34-episode anime and film in 1988, with it also getting a 36-episode net animation series starting at the end of last year in 2023 and ending just a few months ago of me writing this. Again, another Golden Age Jump juggernaut that's still receiving love to this day.
Shonen Jump お前はもう回し読みできないイエイみんなジャンプ仲間だぜ集英社は科学万博つくば85に出展参加します
Sumomo by Shun Amanuma lasted 10 chapters in one volume, it bearing some similarities to our modern-day Me and Roboco, following its main character Plum and a robotic helper named Worker Boy. Set in 2001, Plum gets a worker robot to presumably help with chores and stuff around the house as she lives alone, but the worker boy she gets is faulty, leading to them playing pranks and not working as intended. It's through this though that they develop a close bond together. The ending of the manga sees the manufacturers of the worker boy reclaim him as he's a faulty product, and from what I understand it ends bittersweetly since Plum is left alone without worker boy. However, worker boy is ultimately fixed and is returned without his memories aside from his knowledge of Plum's name. Accounts I can find discussing it praise it quite a bit for its uniqueness, emotional storytelling and art, but are aware it's a bit of an odd work, which is why it likely couldn't thrive alongside the giants of Jump's golden age. Created by Tsutomu Hiramatsu and lasting 15 chapters in 2 volumes, Tobu Kyoushitsu or Flying Classroom is actually a loose adaptation of the 1933 German novel of the same name. The plot follows a group of grade schoolers from Saitama Prefectural Elementary School 8 after a nuclear war. Together with their teacher, they survive doing basics like having to gather shelter, food and water, while also dealing with radiation sickness, injuries, animal threats like wolves, as well as giant mutated plants. It bordered on being a realistic survival drama with some sci-fi elements, but remained quite heavy with its themes, something a lot of people liked as it still got a cult following, with it getting a reprint in 2020, with the author even mentioning an interest in creating a sequel. Jump, however, didn't think it fit the magazine at the time, apparently not cancelling it due to lack of popularity, but its content not really fitting in with the magazine at the time, which is a shame since, as well as sounding like a very engaging and different manga from what Jump was serializing at the time, it had some really cute art that contrasted well with some of the more detailed scenes of the city's destruction. After finishing Cobra, Buchi Terasawa would go on to create Black Knight Bat in Jump, it debuting on the magazine's 17th anniversary and it lasting for 1 volume and 10 chapters. Black Knight Bat might be one of the first manga to ever use computer graphics and computers in general for its creation, with Buchi Terasawa being a pioneer in this field. Clearly some objects in Black Knight Bat look like they're from a computer, and some colouring was apparently done on one too. The use of computer graphics only helps aid Black Knight Bat's weirdness though, as it begins with the 17-year-old Bat Duran, who one day ends up going to an alternate world called Rainboweria. There she becomes queen of a planet that's a spaceship, which she protects with the Thunder Sword. It sounds like something straight out of a child's sketchbook, which works well as I think it really leans into this Alice in Wonderland children's picture book drug trip vibe. Nothing seemingly makes sense, panels are filled with colourful cartoony characters reminiscent of a more western style, and what I can only describe as random objects are featured everywhere as characters, enemies or background details. It's such an interesting manga, I think because you'd never expect it to be in Jump based on its weirdness, eroticism, and the fact it's an author's playful little art experiment. From what I can tell, about half of its chapters have been translated into English all in full colour with no strong overarching story. It It's a perfect manga to just check out if it seems interesting at all. I'm not sure whether Black Knight Bat was axed or not, as it could have been intended to be a short work, but I'm not sure from just reading it. I think both could fit. Either way, it's such a bizarre manga to read and a great example of why I decided to make these videos in the first place, because I get to find and read weird stuff like this. Just Ace was a tennis manga lasting 10 chapters in one volume by Yasuki Inoue. Initially, it begins as a much more grounded work, focusing on a protagonist wanting to beat their rival who looks suspiciously like Char Aznable from Gundam. But quickly it began to be a bit more loosey-goosey with its rules and art, leading to it to focus more on gimmicks up until its very swift cancellation. Nothing much here, just an axed tennis manga, unfortunately. Wolf ni Kiss by Kenichi Kotani and Yu Terushima would be their last work in Jump, lasting 13 chapters and 2 volumes. After a string of flops throughout the last several years, this duo would pivot to doing an ecchi school battle manga about a girl raised by wolves called Ichijo Mika. From what I could find, the manga was all over the place during its run, having elements of slice of life, with Mika being reintroduced into human society, her wolfish tendencies leading to gags and ecchi moments, like her stripping, although she's like 11 and I don't think it's appropriate I show any of that. Aside from the gags, battle elements also existed, with there being a werewolf mentioned and some kind of organization that might want to take Mika away. Maybe it's for the best this was quickly axed though. Takuchiba, the creator of football rom-com Kickoff, would return this time with the baseball rom-com Shorii. Sadly, it would only last 13 chapters and 2 volumes, with it being criticized for its simple portrayal of baseball that lacked strategy and its romance elements which were dated at the time, with manga like Kumagure Orange Road and City Hunter portraying much more nuanced and adult romances. Shorii was just behind the times, so it was promptly cancelled. Roadrunner by Ryuji Sugihara lasted 22 chapters and 3 volumes, starting out as a manga following Retsu, a motorcycle courier who engages in high-speed chases with the police. It initially seemed more like a Lupin vs Zenigata situation at the beginning, rather than anything super criminally related, with Retsu likely getting involved in various episodic hijinks before the manga turned into more of a pure racing manga. It did better than a lot of other ACT series from this year, but it was still cancelled a few months after it began. Love and Fire would see Shinji Hiramatsu return with a boxing manga, but only briefly for 13 chapters and 2 volumes. The main character Hono lost his parents to boxing and grew up in the slums of Africa, hating the sport, but gradually he is called to it again and becomes a boxer. At the beginning he fights a Michael Jackson lookalike called Sniper, and the story sets up the final boss, Jesus. No, not that Jesus, this Jesus, who never gets fought due to the series cancellation, unfortunately. Bizarrely, the series introduces a secondary protagonist and shifts focus to them, with the manga not having enough time to really flesh out their final match before it all ends. It looks cool though, with Hiramatsu's art being one of the highlights. Following the conclusion of Wingman, Masakazu Katsura would return to Jump with another ecchi transforming hero series in Choukidouin Vander. Lasting 20 chapters and 2 volumes, Vander follows Yashiro, who is chosen to be part of the Super Mobile Guard, presumably a force to defend Earth. Yashiro's core trait and character arc revolves around him hating women, which is a very interesting start, and it seemed to follow a Wingman-esque formula, being very similar in mixing its battles with ecchi scenes, of which there are many in this. There are also tons of hyper-detailed depictions of panties specifically. It's no surprise Masakazu Katsura would go on to create manga like Ys in the future. Vander wouldn't be very well received though, and due to its similarities with Wingman and not really trying anything different, and probably coupled with its unlikable main character, it was promptly axed.
わあすごい人気キャラクター満載面白さ目いっぱい週刊少年ジャンプ抜群の人気おわちゃ北斗の拳キャプテン翼そして僕ちゃん筋肉マン筑波万博に行って集英社間の遺跡とにらめっこんさあみんな仲間だ週刊少年ジャンプすごい人気で毎週火曜日発売。
Now let's talk about something I haven't actually mentioned in these videos yet. The actual roster of the magazine, which I know a lot of people enjoy talking about, discussing, and theorizing. Over the last few years of the 80s, we've assembled a good few classic manga that are very well loved. At the beginning of Jump's year, in issue 1-2 of 1985, we have some really big names like Dragon Ball in its early stages, Captain Tsubasa filling the magazine's main sports series slot, Fist of the North Star being one of the new pillars of the magazine, and there's also legacy manga like Kineko approaching its 300th chapter, and of course, Kochikame being ever present, as well as filling a long-term gag slot the magazine usually has. Other notable big hits are High School Kumegumi, still running as another big gag manga, Shape Up Ran is similarly another long-running gag manga, Kimagure Orange Road was also there as an exceptionally popular romance drama manga, Ginga is another battle manga for the magazine, and a core part of the 80s golden age, as well as the long-running Black Angels, Wingman, and Yoroshiku Mechadoc, all fairly big hits at the time that would come to an end this year, with all three authors having other series which I mentioned in this episode, and all three of those flopped. The only flops at the beginning of 1985 are Motomiya's Bakudan, HIP, and Hirohiko Araki's Bao, all of which were in their very early stages at the beginning of the year. Overall, I think the magazine began in a really healthy spot with a lot of rising popular manga, old classics, and a lot of variety. While some of the aforementioned manga would end, the major players would not, giving us a more stacked roster by the end of the year, replacing Black Angels, Mechadoc, and Wingman with City Hunter, Sakigake Otokojuku, and I guess Tonchinkan, two of the biggest manga of Jump's 80s, and a solid gag manga that ran for a while, alongside the three other big gag manga of the magazine. It was a haven for gag manga at this time. We would be left with a handful of duds to enter the next year with though, but like the beginning of the year, the magazine was just as strong, if not stronger, and a big reason for that was Dragon Ball. The latter half of 1985 would focus on the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc, the series still being in its early comedy-focused arcs, but interweaving more action. We last left off with Goku riding into the sunset on Kinto-un, but he soon finds out he has no food and returns to Master Roshi to annihilate the contents of his fridge and get to training. We get some gags with Master Roshi being a perv, Krillin is introduced, as well as Lunch, a character that is promptly forgotten about, but I really like her and her gag. When Lunch sneezes, she changes personalities, one being kind and ditzy, and the other being a gun-toting maniac, which leads to a lot of fun slapstick scenes. We essentially get a whole mini-arc with her before moving on to Goku and Krillin's proper training. The training mostly being Master Roshi pulling out various tasks from his ass or making the two do manual labor. It's all pretty funny though, with it helping to characterize Krillin. Over time we get a nice little rivalry / friendship that brews between the two, both get stronger over time, and Master Roshi takes them to the Tenkaichi Budokai tournament. Here they easily qualify, beating out any opponent who stands against them, and meet back up with some old friends including Bulma and Yamcha, who's also qualified for the top 8 of the Budokai. The first match we see is Krillin vs Bacterian, which is mostly gag focused. There's a lot of gross out humor, with Bacterian's whole gimmick being he's stinky, but once Goku reminds Krillin he has no nose, he's good to beat him without any issues. It's silly but also a lot of fun, and I love that joke. Following this, we have Yamcha vs Jackie Chun, who is definitely not Master Roshi. This fight showcases some cool art, being less comedic, with Jackie swiftly defeating Yamcha by blowing him away with his gentle wind attack. We then get Ranfuan, a haughty female fighter, versus Namu, a man fighting for the sake of his village as they need water. Despite trying to beat Namu by trickery and sex appeal, ultimately his conviction for his village rings true, and he ends the match with a single blow. We then finally get Goku's match against the dinosaur-like like Giran, which features both of them throwing each other out to the ring, but Giran using his wings to fly back in, which is allowed, as well as Goku's use of the Kinto-un, which is also somehow allowed. Eventually Goku's tail grows back, which gives him the leg up in this fight, and he overpowers Giran, making him surrender. Next up, the quarterfinals sees Krillin and Jackie Chun go all out against each other, with Krillin eventually knocking his master out of the ring, only for him to use the Kamehameha to blast back. An excellent fight followed up by Goku vs Namu, which sees him use his tail in some fun ways, eventually surpassing his powerful Heaven's Cross attack. This means the final fight is Goku versus his own master, which is masterfully drawn. It's full of fun comedy like Goku's tail helicopter and the lullaby scene, and the first Kamehameha clash of the series happens here too. It's fun to watch the two beat the snot out of each other, but it starts getting real when Jackie unleashes his Thundershock surprise. This, however, puts Goku in view of the full moon, and with his tail back, he transforms into the Great Ape. How does Jackie get out of this one?
The moon! No! Now, Stone Soldier! Destroy the moon!
It doesn't have too much repercussions, but I can't help but love it with how wacky a concept it is. With a bit more fighting, Jackie / Master Roshi ends up winning the tournament, with Goku being all tuckered out. It's a little anticlimactic maybe, but the fight is good overall, and I had a blast rereading it this time. The cast then has a massive feast, and Goku decides to set out on a new journey to collect the Dragon Balls again. And this brings us to chapter 54 of the series. We're now about 1/10 of the way through, and we're still in the early comedy arcs of Dragon Ball. It's still an absolute joy to read though, and I'll return next time when we look at the Red Ribbon Army arc. And that was Shonen Jump in 1985. We got a few big hits, the continuation of Dragon Ball, and a few smaller interesting series amid a group of some pretty dull ones, unfortunately. As an extra bit of trivia, this year Jump would start its seasonal issues, which would release 4 times a year for each season starting in April. This would actually be the origin of Vander and Roadrunner, which we covered this year. These specials would last until 1996, where they'd be replaced by Akamaru Jump, which would eventually be replaced by what we now know as Jump Giga. I probably won't bring up these seasonal issues in future videos, but I wanted to mention its beginning here. If you haven't already, consider subscribing for more history of Jump videos. I have a back catalogue going all the way back to Shonen Jump's very beginning in 1968. I also have plenty of other videos on the channel covering manga and Shonen Jump, including my X-Files series where I look at more modern cancelled manga a bit more extensively. If you really like what I do, you can also support me on Patreon, where you can be featured at the end of the videos I make with a little doodle like Kinocha, Cody, Kaizoku Gairu, and Soraquill Zero. Thank you all so much for being patrons. And as always, thank you for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.